Somewhere between the front line and the motor pool, there's a single question every recovery crew carries into a kill zone. Can 3 men drag 70 tons of dead tank out from under fire before whoever shot it gets a second shot lined up? In April 2003, an RPG punched through the fuel cell of an M1 Abrams rolling through Baghdad. And for the next 20 minutes, a tank crew that outweighed almost everything else on that road fought to save the one machine that couldn't save itself. This is what it actually takes to pull 70 tons out of a firefight. And it's also the story of what happens on the day it can't be done. Start with the size of the problem, because the size is the whole problem. A combat-loaded M1 A2 Abrams runs close to 70 tons, heavier than a fully loaded commercial dump truck, heavier than most bridges are rated to carry. There's no tow truck on Earth built for that. The Army's answer is a vehicle almost nobody outside an armor unit has ever heard of, the M88 A2 Hercules, and it exists for exactly one job. Go get the tank that everyone else just left behind. The Hercules isn't subtle. It's built on the same basic chassis as the tanks it rescues, wrapped in its own armor, running a main winch rated at 140,000 pounds of constant pull, with 280 feet of cable spooled behind a boom that can lift 35 tons on its own. 3 soldiers ride inside it, usually carrying the maintenance MOS, not the infantry one. Their job title is recovery, but their actual job, on the worst days, is driving a vehicle into the same ground that just killed an engine, a track, or a crew, and doing it slower than everyone else, because the whole point is dragging something out, not getting away fast. Recovery crews aren't picked for bravery on paper. They're picked for the same maintenance MOS that keeps engines running back at the motor pool. Guys who know a transmission by feel and somehow ended up doing that job with people shooting at them. Ask one what the worst part is, and it's rarely the danger. It's usually something smaller. The stink of a hull that's been cooking in the sun for 6 hours, or the fact that your hands are shaking too hard to line up a cable eye you could seat blind back at garrison. That's the first thing that separates this from every other rescue job in the military. A medevac helicopter's entire strategy is speed, in and out before anyone can react. A recovery crew doesn't get that option. The winch cable has to be hooked, the tow bar has to be seated, the spade has to bite into the ground before a single foot of that tank moves. And every one of those steps takes minutes the crew doesn't get to skip. The call usually comes the same way. A tank goes quiet on the radio, or a driver reports he's lost track power, or worse, the crew is already dismounting because something inside caught fire. Whatever knocked the tank out is very likely still out there. An IED means there could be another one buried nearby. An RPG team that scored once will try to score again, because a stationary recovery vehicle straddling a dead tank is a better target than the tank ever was. Nobody on that radio call is thinking about towing procedure yet. They're thinking about how many minutes they have before the same thing that killed the tank finds the men standing next to it. So the Hercules rolls in, low and heavy, and the first hard decision belongs to the vehicle commander, not the winch operator. Where do you park a vehicle that's nearly as heavy as the tank it's here to save, so it can actually pull, and still give the gunner on top a shot back if it comes to that? Too close, and you're both sitting inside the same blast radius. Too far, and the cable can't reach, or the angle is wrong, and a bad angle can snap a cable under load hard enough to take a man's leg off from 30 feet away. Once it's in position, the crew drops the front spade into the dirt. It looks almost simple on a training range, a blade digging into soft ground to anchor the Hercules so the pull doesn't just drag the rescuer toward the wreck instead of the other way around. In combat, it's the vehicle's most exposed minute. The engine has to sit still and idling. The crew has to be certain the spade's bitten deep enough to hold, and none of that happens fast when the ground is rock or mud or a street that was never meant to anchor anything heavier than a delivery truck. Then somebody has to get outside the vehicle, no exceptions, no remote hookup from behind armor. A human being, hands on steel, in the open. This is the part recruiting videos skip. Hooking the tow cable to a disabled tank means a soldier standing in the open, crouched under the hull of a burning or smoking vehicle, threading a cable eye onto a pintle that was never designed to be fast. Radios are shouting distances and directions. The air smells like diesel and whatever's cooking off inside the wreck. Hot metal and rubber, and something underneath that nobody in the crew wants to name out loud. Your hands are doing fine work you've done 100 times in the motor pool. Except now, every few seconds you're listening for the crack that tells you someone's shooting at the two vehicles parked together instead of the one. There's no AAA truck coming for this. No roadside service pulling up with a flatbed and a clipboard. Whatever gets that tank moving again is the three men standing in the open right now. And the only backup on the way is whoever the column can spare from a fight that's still going on 20 meters away. Once the cable's set, the pull itself sounds like the easy part. It isn't. 70 tons doesn't move like 70 tons of dead weight. Depending on what's wrong with the tank, the track might be locked, the transmission might be seized, the whole hull might be half buried in mud or canal or sand that's swallowing it by the minute. Ground that would barely register under a Humvee turns into wet concrete under something this heavy. And every extra degree of angle between the cable and the direction of pull bleeds off power the crew doesn't have to spare. The Hercules' winch was built with a 40% bigger lift and 55% more winching power than the older M88, specifically because the first version of this vehicle couldn't reliably move an Abrams alone. Even with all of that, sometimes one recovery vehicle isn't enough. There's a sound to a winch under real load, a low mechanical groan you feel through the hull before you hear it, and every soldier who's run one says the same thing about the seconds after the cable finally goes taut. You watch the tension gauge and you wait, because a cable that's about to fail doesn't always give you a warning first. A snapped cable under 140,000 pounds of tension doesn't just fall to the ground. It whips, hard enough to take off a limb or a head, well outside the distance anyone standing nearby would expect to be safe. That's why the crew clears the danger zone around the cable line before the winch ever engages. One more thing standing between the recovery crew and simply walking up and pulling the tank out like it's a car in a ditch. And there's a problem nobody plans around until it happens. On broken or saturated ground, the Hercules can dig itself in exactly the way the tank did. Its own tracks spinning into the same mud that just swallowed 60+ tons of Abrams. When that happens, the crew has one more trick built into the vehicle. The Hercules can winch and spade itself back out using its own systems. No second vehicle required. Because the Army learned the hard way that a rescue vehicle stuck next to the thing it came to rescue is just two problems parked in the same kill zone, instead of one. It doesn't always work. Sometimes the ground wins anyway. In April 2004, outside Fallujah, a pair of Marine M1A1s cut through a farming village chasing insurgents who'd just ambushed a patrol on a narrow dirt road cut between irrigation ditches. The ground gave way. A 70-ton tank slid sideways into an irrigation canal and started sinking into the mud. The unit's own M88 came in to pull it out, broke its main cable under the load, and then sank right alongside the tank it was trying to save. Now there were two heavy vehicles stuck in the mud in hostile territory, and the Marines had to call in a second recovery crew and a security element to hold the village overnight while help drove out. "Definitely seeing them is like the cavalry coming," the company commander said when the second crew finally rolled up. That's not a throwaway line, that's what it looks like when the rescue vehicle needs its own rescue vehicle. Here's the part almost nobody outside an armor battalion knows, and it's the part that actually explains what this job is. Recovery isn't always about winning. Sometimes the entire mission, planned and briefed and executed under fire, ends with the crew destroying the very tank they came to save. In Baghdad, on the same April day, a different Abrams took an RPG straight into its rear fuel cell during the armored push into the city known as the Thunder Run. The tank caught fire in the middle of a street that was still an active fight. For almost 20 minutes, the crew and the soldiers around them tried to put the flames out and save the vehicle, while more fighters kept closing in. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Erich Schwartz, made the call that no recovery manual likes to advertise. Pull the crew out. Strip the sensitive equipment. Then fill the burning tank with thermite grenades and drive the rest of the column away, leaving what was left of a 70-ton main battle tank behind in the street. The Air Force finished the job later with an airstrike, just to be sure. It was, by most accounts, the first time the United States had deliberately abandoned and destroyed one of its own Abrams tanks, rather than let it fall into enemy hands. Not saved, burned. That's the reveal nobody puts in the recruiting ad. A recovery crew doesn't train to bring the tank home no matter what. They train to make the call fast about whether saving 70 tons of steel is worth risking the 4 or 5 men it would take to save it. And if the answer is no, their new job is to make sure the enemy gets nothing but ash and a burned-out hull for their trouble. Most missions don't end that way. Most of the time the spade holds, the cable holds, the Hercules backs off slow and steady with a dead tank trailing behind it at a walking pace, and the whole column limps back to friendly lines together, engines straining, tow bar groaning at every pothole, the smell of hot brakes drifting back through the hatch of every vehicle behind it. But every crew that straps into one of these vehicles knows the other version of the story exists, because somebody in their unit has usually lived through some version of it. The training doesn't just cover winching angles and cable tension, it covers the exact procedure for when the answer stops being, "How do we save this?" and becomes, "How fast can we make sure nobody else gets to use it?" There's no roadside assistance plan for that decision either. No manual hands a lieutenant colonel a script for burning his own tank in the middle of a street he's still fighting for. That call gets made in the 20 minutes it takes flames to spread through a hull, weighed against every extra minute the column stays parked in a kill zone, waiting on a machine that might already be beyond saving. It's the same math a recovery crew runs every single time they roll up on a dead tank, just compressed and made final. Even when the tank does come home, the job isn't finished at the tree line. A recovered Abrams still has to be assessed, and not every casualty makes it back to a full rebuild. Some come back for a new engine and transmission, swapped out whole in the field because the Hercules can lift a 1500 horsepower power pack straight out of the hull with its own boom, a job that used to mean shipping the tank hundreds of miles to a depot and now takes a crew a matter of hours in a motor pool tent. Others come back as parts, stripped for whatever pieces of them can still keep a sister tank running. Either way, the alternative, leaving it exactly where it died, hands the enemy a working turret, a working gun, and a propaganda photo that costs far more than the recovery mission ever did. None of this shows up on the recruiting poster. There's no medal specifically for hooking a cable straight, no ribbon for reading a tension gauge correctly under fire. The soldiers who do this work mostly get remembered, if they get remembered at all, as the guys who showed up in the tow truck. Ask a tanker who's actually been stranded in one, and the story changes. Ask the crew from that farming village outside Fallujah, sitting in the mud all night, waiting on a second recovery team to arrive, and the guys in the tow truck is closer to the only reason we made it home. So was it worth it? 20 minutes of men standing in the open under fire, threading cable onto a tank that might already be a lost cause, gambling 4 lives against 70 tons of machine that the army can eventually replace, and they can't. Every recovery crew that's ever hooked a cable to a burning hull has answered that question differently, sometimes in the same afternoon, sometimes with a decision that ends with thermite instead of a tow chain. Nobody hands them a formula for it. They make the call with the smoke already in their eyes and the clock already running, and then they live with whichever answer they gave. The tank is replaceable. What it costs to find that out, standing in the open with someone shooting at you, isn't.